Welcome to the Golden Gems podcast. Today we're taking a deep dive into Huey P. Newton, the revolutionary who co-founded the Black Panther Party at 24, built the free breakfast program, and was tragically shot dead by a drug dealer at 47.
And we have a very specific mission for today's discussion.
Right. We are examining a really highly critical forensic essay that just completely breaks down Newton's legacy. So, this isn't your standard biography.
No, not at all. It's framed more as this intense intellectual exploration of, how state power actually operates and maintains itself.
And how one guy basically tried to decode and entirely subvert it. So for you listening right now, I want you to think about the systems in your own life.
Yeah, the bureaucracies, the rules that just feel totally immovable.
Exactly. Because the central theme of this deep dive is that all systems, no matter how entrenched they seem, have a code. And if there's a code, well, it can be hacked.
Which is such a powerful framework, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because power relies on this illusion of permanence. It wants you to think its dominance is just natural and inevitable.
Right, completely unchangeable.
Yeah. But the analysis we're looking at strips that illusion away by starting with the genealogical foundations of his life.
Right.
To really get his methodology, we have to start in 1942.
Right, in Monroe, Louisiana, deep in the Jim Crow South.
Exactly. So we are talking about an environment totally defined by racial terror. The black population there lived under this constant daily threat of violence.
And the law wasn't some neutral thing, right? It was explicitly a weapon of control.
Yes. It was an extractive system.
Well, I want to stop you there and just dig into that reality for a second, because that is the baseline he absorbs from birth. Being black in Monroe meant you were a designated target.
Literally. So his family joins the Second Great Migration. They pack up, they head to Oakland, California, looking for a way out.
Looking for opportunity, trying to escape that overt Southern terror. But, what they actually find is just this different geography of oppression.
Right. Oakland had the shipyards and the factories, but the wealth was systematically kept from black workers.
We hear the term redlining a lot, but how did that function as a mechanic of control in West Oakland specifically, like on a granular level?
Well, the mechanics just changed form. In the South, it was explicit segregation and lynch mobs. In Oakland, the violence was bureaucratic.
Right, drawing literal red lines on city maps.
Exactly. Signaling to banks and agencies not to invest in black neighborhoods like West Oakland. And you combine that with restrictive covenants and property deeds.
Which prevented white owners from selling to black buyers.
Yeah. So the neighborhood was deliberately starved of resources. The text emphasizes that the environment wasn't failing accidentally. It was functioning exactly as engineered.
Which fundamentally shifts how we have to view the Oakland public schools of that era. The documentation shows these schools weren't actually designed to educate black kids.
No, they were operating as warehouses, essentially, just trying to break their spirits and prep them for menial labor.
And it worked. Newton actually graduated from Oakland Tech in 1960, functionally illiterate.
Which is staggering. The shame of that could have easily destroyed him.
But instead, it becomes his massive aha moment. He decides he's going to teach himself to read. And, okay, let's unpack this. He doesn't start with Dr. Seuss.
No, definitely not.
He goes straight for the foundational philosophy of state power. He picks Plato's Republic. It's like learning to code by immediately dismantling the Pentagon's firewall.
It's a great analogy. And the process was incredibly grueling. He just forced himself to decode the symbols, word by painful word.
The record says he read that dense philosophical text 5 times over.
5 times. And by the end, he hadn't just learned English. He had mastered these incredibly complex arguments about justice and the architecture of power.
He realized the system isn't magic, right? It's built by humans using a specific logic. And if you learn the logic...
You can subvert the system. Exactly.
So he takes this realization to Merritt College. He just immerses himself in Karl Marx, Lenin, Frantz Fanon, Malcolm X.
Right. He's absorbing dialectical material, this Marxist idea that historical events are driven by material needs and class conflict.
And Fanon's psychology of oppression.
Yeah. But all this theory creates this massive internal friction for him. Because he looks at his fellow student activists and he's just deeply frustrated.
Because they're just sitting in safe classrooms debating high-level Marxist theory, right? While right outside, West Oakland is basically occupied by a militarized police force.
Precisely. He decides that intellectual theory without actual street-level action is completely meaningless.
So the theory has to become physical, which brings Bobby Seale into the picture. Seale is at Merritt College, too, and he shares that exact same impatience.
Yeah, they both know that reading Plato doesn't stop a police baton.
Right. They need an organization to challenge state power directly on the pavement.
And this is the critical pivot from system analysis to system hacking.
Yeah.
It's October 1966 at the North Oakland Service Center. They draft the 10-point platform and program.
The founding document of the Black Panther Party for self-defense. And the demands are incredibly specific structural things.
Housing, true education, the release of black prisoners who didn't get fair trials.
But that final point, the 10th point, is the really radical one. It demands armed self-defense, relying specifically on the Second Amendment.
This is where his tactical genius really shines. He had meticulously studied the California Penal Code, specifically Section 1331.
The open carry loophole.
Right. The law allowed citizens to openly carry loaded firearms as long as they weren't concealed or pointed in a threatening way.
He read the state's own user manual and found the glitch. It's basically a terms of service loophole that let them legally operate outside police control.
Yeah, he realized black citizens could legally patrol their neighborhoods with shotguns. And if they followed the exact letter of the law, the police couldn't do a thing.
The visual of this is just wild. They called it policing the police. An Oakland PD officer pulls over a black driver, and suddenly, Panthers show up.
With law books in one hand and loaded shotguns in the other.
Standing at the exact legally mandated distance, they pull out a bullhorn and just start reciting constitutional rights.
Telling the driver, you know, you don't have to consent to a search. And when the officers try to intimidate them, the Panthers just cite the penal code right back.
The police had been operating with absolute impunity for decades. Suddenly, they're being monitored by armed black men who know the law better than they do.
It exposed a massive vulnerability in the state's monopoly on force. And membership just exploded because people finally saw someone surviving a standoff with the police.
But, you know, guns only stop immediate physical violence. You can't just play defense forever when people are starving.
Right, you need parallel institutions.
So in January 1969, they launched the Free Breakfast for Children program. They're feeding 10,000 kids every single day.
Free food, no questions asked.
Which is wild because we treat free school breakfast as a standard government service today. But it started as this radical anti-state intervention.
It was so successful, the federal government ended up copying it.
Yet J. Edgar Hoover calls them the greatest threat to internal security. So here's where it gets really interesting. Why did feeding kids scare the FBI more than men with shotguns?
It's a profound question. And it really gets to the core of the essay's analysis on state power. The armed patrols were defensive. But the breakfast program was an offensive, structural intervention.
Because it proved the state was unnecessary.
Exactly. They were proving this specifically to the most marginalized people, what Marxists would call the lumpen proletariat.
Let's quickly define that for the listener. When we say lumpen proletariat, we mean the permanently locked out class, right? The folks, capitalism totally discarded.
Yes, the hustlers, the chronically unemployed, the unorganized underclass. Newton saw they had the most revolutionary potential because they had absolutely nothing to lose.
So if a grassroots group can secure food and feed that community when the government won't, it just shatters the illusion of the state's authority.
Right. When you expose the state's obsolescence to the people at the very bottom, you become a true existential threat.
And the state realizes it has to crush him. Which brings us to October 28th, 1967. 2 in the morning. A traffic stop ends in a massive shootout.
Officer John Frey is killed, another is wounded, and Newton is shot in the abdomen.
The exact details are super disputed in the historical record, but he's charged with murder. And this collision completely shifts the trajectory of the movement.
He conducts his own defense from jail. He uses all that legal study to cross-examine witnesses and challenge the evidence.
And after 3 years, the California Court of Appeals overturns the conviction in 1970 over procedural errors. He walks.
But during those 3 years, the Free Huey campaign made him an international symbol.
Right, rallies in Paris and London. Jean Genet, the French playwright, travels to America just to support him.
He becomes a global figure.
So what does this all mean? He's fighting this geopolitical war against the FBI while trying to redefine global capitalism.
And his intellectual evolution really accelerates here. He develops this concept called Revolutionary Intercommunalism.
Which is fascinating. Explain that a bit.
Well, by the early 70s, Newton looks at the economy and argues that the concept of individual nation-states is basically dead.
Because of multinational corporations.
Exactly. He theorizes they dissolve traditional borders, creating a global ruling class and a globally interlinked oppressed class.
He's predicting the gig economy and transnational corporate dominance 50 years early.
Yes. He argued that because capital was global, resistance had to be global. He even goes to China in 1971 to meet their leadership based on this theory.
The scale of his intellectual output is staggering. But while he's operating globally, the domestic counterattack from the state is just reaching a fever pitch.
We really have to look at the forensic history of COINTELPRO here, the FBI's counterintelligence program.
Right. Hoover used brutal psychological warfare to dismantle the Panthers from the inside out. Let's dig into the actual mechanisms. How did they fracture the party?
It was incredibly methodical. Yes, they used informants, but more insidiously they used forged letters. Imagine getting a letter, supposedly from your closest ally, threatening your life or calling you a police informant. Hoover's goal was to weaponize their own trauma.
To make them paranoid enough to turn their guns on each other.
Exactly. And the FBI also coordinated with local police, providing floor plans that led directly to the targeted killings of leaders like Fred Hampton in Chicago.
And Bobby Hutton in Oakland. The psychological toll of that is just unfathomable. Constant surveillance, legal battles, waking up to find your friends assassinated by the state.
The trust just completely evaporates. By 1974, facing new charges and absolutely convinced he'll be assassinated, Newton flees to Cuba.
He lives in Havana for 3 years working as a mechanic, completely isolated from the movement he built.
He eventually returns to the U.S. in 1977 to face those charges, which mostly end in mistrials. But the Oakland he comes back to is fundamentally different.
The revolutionary energy of the 60s is gone. And by the 1980s, crack cocaine has absolutely flooded West Oakland.
And it's important to note how the source text handles this. The analysis relies on Gary Webb's Dark Alliance investigation regarding CIA complicity in the drug trade.
Right, framing it strictly as documented context for what was essentially chemical warfare against these exact vulnerable communities.
Exactly, and it's within this systematically devastated environment that Newton's accumulated vulnerabilities finally catch up to him.
I mean, he survived the FBI, solitary confinement, shootouts, but 2 decades of institutional warfare leaves him deeply traumatized.
He develops a severe crack addiction. The brilliant theorist who debated at Yale is now struggling for daily survival on the corners of West Oakland.
And it all culminates on August 2010, 1989. Newton is out on 9th Street, unarmed. He gets into a confrontation with Tyrone Robinson, a 25-year-old drug dealer.
Robinson shoots Newton in the head, leaving him to die on the sidewalk.
It's just a heartbreaking irony. The man who dedicated his life to organizing and protecting the most discarded members of society is killed by a member of that exact underclass.
The profound synthesis from the essay is that the state didn't actually need to send an assassin in the end.
Because the conditions were engineered into the environment?
Exactly. Between the violent dismantling via COINTELPRO and the unchecked influx of narcotics, the architecture of West Oakland was designed to produce that exact violent outcome.
So Newton is gone. But the state realizes killing the man doesn't kill the idea. The question for his family is, how do you stop the FBI from erasing his intellectual blueprints?
Right. How do you stop them from rewriting history and reducing the Panthers to just armed criminals? Well, they ensure the survival of the data.
Frederica Newton, his widow, and David Hilliard established the Dr. Huey P. Newton Foundation.
They methodically gather everything, documents, legal briefs, theoretical writings, and they transfer this massive archive to the Stanford University Special Collections vault.
The original 10-point program, the logistical spreadsheets for the breakfast program, the notes on intercommunalism, it's all preserved.
Which brings us to why this analysis is so crucial today. Looking at that vault from the perspective of the year 2026, his writing feels entirely prophetic.
Because the issues didn't disappear, they just upgraded their tech. We're looking at dystopian police militarization, surveillance drones, facial recognition software in urban neighborhoods.
The economic abandonment of cities, predatory housing markets leaving generations unhoused.
And that absolute dominance of global capitalism he mapped out. That's the unavoidable daily reality for billions now. Why does this matter to you today?
Because these aren't museum relics. They're living blueprints.
Exactly.
The ultimate takeaway is that even when a revolutionary movement is decimated by external pressure and tragic internal collapse, the architectural manual for survival remains intact.
The breakfast program proved the state can be bypassed. The patrols proved the law can be used against itself to protect the vulnerable.
The blueprints are secure, offering a schematic for the next generation to study and apply to the incredibly complex systems they face today.
It is a profound legacy. And it leaves us with the core thesis of the analysis to really reflect on. How long can a society sustain the illusion of democratic peace when the blueprints of its own domestic warfare have been so thoroughly documented, so precisely analyzed, and so completely exposed by a man who taught himself to read just to prove the empire was burning?
It's a question that just lingers with you.
It really does.
Yeah.
Today's deep dive was guided by the critical analysis of cultural critic and biographer Abel Arroyo.
A truly phenomenal piece of forensic historical work.
Thank you for listening to the Golden Gems podcast. We'll be back next time with another deep dive. Until then, keep exploring, keep listening, and keep celebrating the power of uncompromising voices.